I woke up so grumpy this morning, y'all, that after our morning stuff that we did, I ate lunch and then I went to bed. I put my self down for a damn nap like I was a toddler or something. And I'm telling you, the reset was amazing. I woke up feeling so much better.
Only I could get my toddlers to put themselves down for a nap.
We don't have any toddlers anymore.
Oh my gosh.
Unpacking Mormonism is a subsidiary of Daisy Girl Communications, LLC. All content herein is intended for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice or counsel of your personal care provider.
Truth.
Yeah, welcome back to Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma. Life on the home front this morning was a bit traumatic with a grumpy, hormonal mother. We're excited to be here.
You do have an impact, it's for sure.
Oh, yeah. When mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. When daddy ain't happy, mama kicks him out to go pick up dog poop or some other menial task. And I'm just teasing, Mason. You gave me this really bad look. Oh, that's funny. So we are going to be talking today about our emotions or our feelings. And our intention is to help our listener understand a little bit why it's so hard to get into that place where we can openly talk about how the situations around us are making us feel. Why is it so hard to talk about our damn emotions? Damn it. Grumpy woman this morning.
Yeah, so this kind of came from a couple different places. One, the last live show that we did, we talked about the SEC and their fine for not disclosing the value of the church's assets and things like that. And we talked about that. And we started that by talking about how we were going to spend more time dealing with the emotions of it. And
we got an F.
Didn't really do that. I felt like the show went great, but we didn't really deal with the emotions of that.
I don't know. Did I feel like the show went great? I wouldn't say the show went great. I think the show was decent. I feel like we came into it a little unprepared. For me, it wasn't my favorite for sure. And I agree with you, Mason. I would give us like a D-. We did talk about emotions at the end, but we were so caught up again in the facts, which makes sense. And so we said, we really need to do a show on why it's so difficult for us to get down into how these things are making us feel.
So the feelings thing, really mostly my fault. I just have a hard time talking about them and spending quality time discussing the emotion of a situation. And so we discussed that afterwards and agreed that we needed to kind of pursue this. And then the second thing, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to just say that you're saying it's my fault. I actually disagree with that. Just because I don't think there's a fault there. So I just want our listener, hey y'all, he self-proclaimed that not talking about feelings was his fault, not me. So maybe I'm feeling a little defensive right now.
Why are you defensive that I'm saying it's my fault that we're not talking about feelings? I'm all confused.
It's because there was that email that we got from a listener.
So that was the second thing I was going to bring up.
Oh, go. You go.
So
I'll get, yeah.
The second piece of this is we got an email that was very nice, said some positive things about the podcast. We always love getting that feedback, and we love getting constructive criticism too, which she had some to offer. In this case, I think she'd said that she'd only listened to one or two of our podcasts, and so she had just a small window of information, but she said that she felt like sometimes you, Sarah, come off a little condescending because you're therapizing me.
Yes, that is true.
And I just need to share that I don't ever feel condescended toward. I do feel like I get therapized some, but usually we're pretty good at vocalizing that. And I don't ever feel like I don't have the ability to say, no, we're not talking about that. Because there's been a couple of times like, well, what do you think about talking about this right now? In fact, some of our episodes have been built on that when it's come to, my family drama and things like that. The episode has been built upon we're going to kind of talk this out together on the air because we know that other people are feeling the same things.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we've been able to discuss the emotions, and sometimes we haven't done as well, and we appreciate the feedback there. I just need everybody to know I don't feel that way. But that doesn't necessarily mean that others might not. And so it's something for us to pay attention to.
Right. Because, the first person, when I received the email, cause I'm the one those emails come directly to my phone, on my email
Right, you
app,
watch them a
whatever.
little
I'm the
more
first
closely.
one that gets those, right? If you're emailing us, I'm the one that sees those. And so the very first thing I did when we received this email, which, our producer actually recommended that we read it. And so I think that we absolutely will hear in a minute. Mason, do I need to pull that up, or do you?
Oh, to read it on the podcast
Yeah,
itself?
he said to read the email on the air and kind of address some of that. And one of the things that I really liked about the email was that the constructive criticism, they may not have liked our show and whatnot, but the way that they approached us was incredibly respectful.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like they were attacking or belittling. It was just a sharing of an opinion and giving us that feedback. And so after I forwarded the email to the production team, which is, you, Mason, myself, and then our producer, Alex, will see those. We kind of got together, and some of the feedback or some of the stuff that came from that conversation was that, a lot of people just don't know you and I, Mason, and our
Sure.
level of comfort in talking and our way of bantering back and
There's
forth
only
with
so
each
much
other.
they can get from these short podcasts. Yeah.
Right. And so I think it's important for me, or even for you, Mason, to kind of check in and say, hey, how are you feeling about, and then insert the fact that Sarah might be therapizing you a little bit, because the goal is never to make you feel less than. The goal is never to make you feel like I'm smarter than you, because maybe in the field of behavioral health, I have more expertise. That's not smarter than, that's just, this is where I've focused my life on. And for you, Mason, you are much smarter than I am in the medical field and in nursing and in medical stuff. And so that's just one of those areas that I think we need to be very cautious with. So I was very appreciative of that.
Yeah, well, and I've always found that saying things like much smarter is so subjective and not very helpful. It's almost like you're trying to judge somebody's level of intelligence by an expertise in a particular area, and it's just not fair to anyone. Mm-hmm. Like you are far more educated when it comes to psychotherapy and mental health than I am, and I'm of course far more educated when it comes to anesthesia and just medicine in general, but that doesn't have any reflection on our intelligence level or anything like that. So we certainly don't want to come off as condescending, and sometimes I imagine we probably feel that way towards the listener as well, that we're coming off condescending towards the listener, and that is not in our intention at all, ever, because everyone out there is having a different experience. Everyone is struggling in different ways, and we're hoping simply to be able to share from our experience and our knowledge base ways that we can get through those struggles and come out on top and feeling better about ourselves and better about our situations.
Right. So would you like for me to read this? Because
go right ahead.
I found it. And
let's hear your melodic tones.
And again, as I'm reading this, I really appreciate the way this listener approached the feedback. So this individual says, hello, Sarah and Mason. I have only listened to your first 2 episodes, and here are some of my thoughts. I like the dual faith couple back and forth, and the topic is interesting. Some of the tips for talking to people within the church and outside have been helpful. As someone who is transitioning out of the church, I have appreciated some of the points made. What I don't like is Sarah therapizing Mason. I feel like it's condescending for Sarah to do so, and she treats him as a student and not as a peer. Mason comes across as nice guy, naive, and good-natured. Good luck to both of you. I may not listen that much, but I do appreciate you steering me toward Mormon stories. Thanks.
Well, and I am a nice guy. I am naive.
Well, No,
I think what I was going to say to that, and then you can say what you're going to say, is that we've kind of agreeably put myself in the situation of learner because we're talking about mental health. We're talking about getting through struggles that are of a mental and emotional origin, I guess, is the word I'm looking for. And I am not experienced in those things. I'm not good at those. And so I have been learning perhaps just as much as any listener out there has been learning. And I feel like the way that we've addressed those things has been very good and healthy.
Well, most of the time.
Sure.
It's been healthy.
We've made our mistakes along the way, no question.
Well, we'll have to talk about an incident that we had trouble on the home front where I decided to drive away for a really long time or something here.
Oh, good.
Put us all on the spot. No, and I really appreciated that. I appreciated the opportunity for me to check in, mostly with you, Mason, because like I said, I forwarded this and then I texted you because you were, of course, at work. It was, we of course get that email on like, I think a weekend you were on call or something. So I was like, I'm going to forward this now and text Mason now. Otherwise I'm going to forget. And on the other side of that is, and he's not here for us to process it. So I really was appreciative for the opportunity to check in with you. And then on the other side, Mason, yeah, I agree. We've kind of put you in the position of learner on purpose. And as many of our listeners have given us feedback, they like having a voice of the learner on the podcast. And so I really want to say again to this listener, if you happen to hear this episode, thank you. We really appreciated the way you presented the criticism and the constructive feedback.
Yeah. Yeah.
At this point, I don't think we're going to change a whole lot in the formatting of the podcast. However, we will strive to check in with each other, both on the air and off the air, because if I'm ever causing Mason or saying things that are triggering for you, Mason, that makes you feel like I'm putting myself in an elevated position over you, we want to own that as a couple. That's a very valuable skill set in our relationship. And
yeah, well, we've talked about power differentials through a couple of different episodes, and that's not what we're looking for. But recognizing that they commonly exist, it's kind of a natural order of things. So if you don't pay attention, you might end up in a situation where power differential exists and perpetuates when that's not what you're looking for.
Right, absolutely. I agree with that. And then the last point I want to, talk about on here is, she had thanked me for referencing her to the Mormon Stories episode. And I actually emailed this individual back and I told her, thank you. I'm going to check in with Mason. I appreciate it. And then I said, hey, if you get over on the Mormon Stories website, they've got a section of like their, most important or most listened to episodes. Right. And I recommend you listen to those since you're new in your faith transition. But really, that just reminded me, I am so grateful for this ex-Mormon community because I don't feel like we are in this ugly competition. I feel, I've had conversations even very recently with Bill Reel and was very grateful for that conversation with him because Bill is the reason we were able to get our live stuff going and also have a much better sound platform and whatnot for our guests that are not here. And so Bill's insight, which he did not charge me for at all. I didn't pay him a dime, but he offered that in order to help us be more successful in this space. And so I absolutely love that. And it's an honor to me. A lot of people might take that final statement of thank you for introducing me to Mormon Stories as, oh my goodness, that's a competition thing.
No,
aren't you offended by that? And my response is no, I'm really grateful. If our dynamic isn't working for you as the listener, we want to help you find resources that fit your learning style, your needs better. And so I was really grateful for that. And also just want to shout out, I'm really honored to be a part of this community where, yes, we're the little guy kind of referencing the bigger guy, but I've had conversations with the people over at Mormon Stories as well. They are incredibly busy, But I feel like, those coordination opportunities are absolutely there. And that I feel like we do a pretty good job of networking between Mormonism Live, us, some of these other ones, like we've talked about the Almost Awakened podcast. We've talked about Robin Gobble's podcast, I think, on the Raising Crazy side. And so, yes, we really want to make sure that one of our goals here at Unpacking Mormonism is connecting the listener with valuable resources. So again, thank you, listener, for that feedback. And then, Mason, let's come back to, we've done a few of these episodes recently where we've started out with, let's talk about feelings. And then once again, we've gotten caught up. I'm 6 today. Caught up. And thank you, Mason. We have gotten caught up in sharing the facts and our opinions. And we really haven't dug into, as much as we would like to, how this is affecting us on a deep emotional, mental health space. That's always kind of been almost the final thoughts, or these last 15 minutes. And we really want to do more with that. So this is us being intentional in doing that.
Yeah, after that long introduction, let's jump right in, right?
It was only 17 minutes.
Oh, is that all? Okay,
yeah, we're only
good.
17 minutes in. We're good.
Yeah. So.
All right, so Mason, in our planning meeting, which we didn't really have for this episode because we wanted it to be more of just kind of a free thinking conversation, you said that you had...
Scary.
I know. You said that you went to your notebook where you take notes either during or after your therapy sessions with your individual therapist. Did you come across anything that you really want to that you want to start out with and share, or do you want me to go ahead and start out with science shit?
That's a good question. I'm not certain I settled on anything that I wanted to start with, but one thing that comes to mind that is kind of a recurring theme is one of the reasons that I don't feel or don't allow myself to feel is because it hurts. And so maybe we can just kind of start there. That's the big thing for me. I don't know how prevalent that is. I'm certain I'm not alone, but that's where it is for me, is that I have learned subconsciously, not intentionally, but I have learned to not feel because I believe it stops the pain of whatever comes from whatever situation. And I'm not saying that is accurate or that is the case for everybody, but it is the case for me. And so, and if you don't have a place that you had wanted to start, then maybe we can start there.
Well, then
you decide if that's as helpful as I thought it was.
I think that's incredibly helpful. I'm just going to rephrase it a little bit because it looked like your wheels were turning as you were formulating your sentences. So I just want to make sure that I'm checking for understanding. So What I heard you say was you grew up with a belief and you feel like you've settled on this place in your life that you are avoiding feeling, like your emotional affect feelings, as a way to protect yourself from experiencing hurt, pain, anguish, fill in the blank. Is that an accurate reframing of what you said?
Yes, except that it sounded like the way you described it sounded like it was an intentional thing on my part, and I don't think that it was.
Okay, yeah, I apologize.
Okay.
You're right. It did. When I think about what I just said, I'm like, oh, it makes it sound like he's doing it consciously.
Right.
This is not a conscious thing. This is a discovery that you've had.
Right. I agree with
therapy.
everything else you said as a reframe. I agree with except for that part. So.
Got it. Well, I'd like to use a couple of cartoon, some animated movie analogies, if we can, to kind of describe why that's a really common thing. I feel like you might throw something at me. No, I'm just teasing. Okay, so our brain, if you remember, our amygdala goes really, really fast. So is it Utopia? Is that the movie with the sloth that's really slow and the bunny cop? Zootopia. Yep. Thank you. And that is, who did that? Is that a DreamWorks or a Universal?
Something? No, it's Disney.
It's Disney. You know what? I just heard that ding that I've been hearing all day. It's got to be coming from my computer.
You must be the culprit.
Well, it says I'm on Do Not Disturb. I apologize for the dings in the background. That's driving me nuts, though. All righty, stupid dinger. Okay, so
Zootopia, and I believe it's Disney.
Right. So I want us, as a review of this relationship between our frontal cortex and our amygdala, to look at the amygdala like the bunny cop. So going a million miles a minute, needing the solution, like give me a solution, give me a solution, give me a solution. Also, really little and wanting to be heard, like going the extra mile and moving really quickly to make sure that bunny cop, whose name I can't remember right now, is seen and valued, and that she's not at fault for causing issues or pain or anguish. She wants to be good enough. And so she's moving quickly, and overachieving and overcompensating in order to achieve this state of problem solving very quickly, don't add to the issue, get it done, and notice me. And that is, in a lot of ways, the way our brain works, but specifically our amygdala. Our amygdala identifies a problem, and the firing mechanisms, these electrical, not impulses, the electrical, I can't think.
Signals.
Thank you. The electrical signals are firing just millions of times faster than anywhere else in the brain because it is your survival mechanism. And that area of the brain doesn't like pain. It doesn't like discomfort. It doesn't like sitting with your emotions. Our frontal cortex is also pretty quick. So our logical, rational, creative, reasoning brain, it can fire incredibly quickly as well. But not when the amygdala is going 7 bazillion miles a minute. So when the amygdala is in bunny mode, our frontal cortex becomes the sloth. And the sloth is trying to catch up and letting the brain, the survival amygdala,
that's not obnoxious at all.
what it needs to do to keep us safe. And so when you're in that place of discomfort, we kind of have to retrain our brain to sit in that emotional space. And that's why a lot of us as counselors will say, lean into the discomfort, because that purposeful, intentional leaning in to the emotional stuff, to the physiological sensations is so important because it forces our brain to slow down. The other thing that our brain, the other cartoon I want to do is, I believe Disney, is Fix It Felix a Disney? I think that one is. Or is that one a DreamWorks?
I don't remember.
All right, so Mason, as I share this analogy, why don't we get our credits to these movies correct? Because I don't want, Disney to come down and sue me.
Yeah, sure.
And then they could sue away. I don't have anything for them. Don't sue me. I have no money. So anyway, our brain wants to fix things. We are problem solvers. It feels good to see a problem and fix it. Okay, so Fix It Felix is Disney, and who is Zootopia?
Disney.
They're both Disney?
Mm-hmm. Shit. Course.
Disney, I love you. Love me back. Be nice, please. Don't do to me what you're doing all over, what is it, Etsy? Don't sue me. So anyway, our brain is very much like a Fix It Felix. Like everything it touches, it wants to fix. And not necessarily that everybody goes out to fix things, but when we get those uncomfortable emotions, our natural human tendency is to bop it with a hammer, bop, and it's better. Yay. And that's what's going on in our brain in these hormones, is that when we feel like the brain comes up with a solution and we bop it with that and it feels good, we get that little dopamine push, that reward center. And so our brain is actually being rewarded for avoiding the uncomfortable emotions. But it's like that addictive thing in the sense that that's not healthy for long-term interactions, connections, belonging. It is the part of our brain that responds in this way as a survival mechanism, because the amygdala thinks everything is dangerous. And when we don't slow our brain down in order to experience the emotions, we're constantly stopping. It's a thought stopping thing where we're like, nope, can't be uncomfortable, fix it. Bam. Nope, can't be uncomfortable, fix it. Bam. So kind of like in Fix It Felix, when the, like superhero, badass female characters like, dude, you are annoying the out of me. You can't just bop this and fix it. This doesn't just go away like that. When Fix It Felix learned to appreciate chaos a little bit more, then there was that connection.
So it sounds a little bit like you're saying, maybe I can just kind of restate this in a way that works for my brain.
Yeah, absolutely.
We talked about
learner.
We talked about
Come on, you.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You're talking about the base of the pyramid is always going to have priority until we slow down and say, what's next?
Right.
And so if given the choice between your frontal cortex and your amygdala, your body is going to choose the amygdala if it's been fired, simply because that is the survival part. Like, this is what we focus on now, because surviving is the most important thing. In
a way, yes, and in another way, no. If there is a real threat, like if a grizzly bear was to saunter into our recording studio and stand up and hit its chest, or maybe that's now I've got a grizzly bear, orangutan, ape thingy coming into my office. I'm gonna dream about this character tonight, y'all. But if that was to saunter into this office and be threatening, our amygdalas would absolutely take over, and that's appropriate.
Right.
I think
survival
what happens,
is all that matters at this point.
Right. I think what happens, and what the theory is that because we're not exercising that purposeful slowdown, and we're talking about, it's been this way in society. Young children are taught that their emotions are uncomfortable for their caregivers and they need to knock it off, whatever it is, so that the status quo becomes comfortable again in the environment. And so from the time we're itty bitty, we are taught to shut our emotions off to make the people around us more comfortable. Yeah. And, in Brene Brown's work, she talks about parents doing this in a shaming way, but we also tend to do it in non-shaming ways. So things like, if you're going to cry, I need you to go do that in your room, or you need to go away from me to calm down, or, we can be really nice and still be turning off emotions. And that's one of the reasons why I love the work. And Robin Gobble's actually coming out with a book, and we're going to have to link that in here, and we'll definitely bring this up later. But I love the work of Robin. So I had the opportunity to meet Robin in one of the darkest times of our life, and when we were like terrified due to a traumatic adoption experience. When we had Abby, I was having some very traumatic responses with unrealistic fears that I was going to lose Abby afterwards.
You'd experienced some significant losses,
yes.
And Abigail was tied into that.
Yeah, so but my point being, Robin was very gentle with me, and as I've studied her work, and she has a podcast as well, and we'll get that. Mason, can you actually look that up so that way we can verbally state that, and then we'll link our listeners to that podcast. But she talks about parenting after trauma, and really where her expertise is parenting children that are being adopted out of the foster system. And she talks about responding to the physiological need first, because we have to physiologically soothe And then we can get that curiosity and we can get into those emotions and how they affect us. But what happens is from the time we're itty bitty, we're training our brain through our experiences in our environment that the emotional expression is unsafe. And so because we're being trained from being little that emotions are unsafe, now our amygdala is having these false activations. You're having a survival response because you're having a vulnerable emotional experience. And we as a society, this is going to take generations to shift, where we need to shift things so that our children can be safe having an emotionally or an intense emotional experience without their caregivers and environments shutting that down, in order to shift this brain pattern of you're crying, that's not safe. And also from an evolutionary point, if my young child is crying, it's normal to shush it and try and quiet it, because a screaming child, evolutionarily speaking, is a risk to the entire tribe if we're sleeping in the forest and there are predators around.
Right. But not anymore.
Right. Well,
Right.
And so, but we've got
At least for most of us.
Right. And we've got to just kind of respect these systems. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. If you're not good at feeling emotions, you're normal. Like Mason, when in your childhood were you allowed to have an intense emotional experience without being disciplined for it?
That's a hard question to answer, of course. The initial response is I wasn't. And I'm not certain that's completely accurate, but it is how I feel about the situation. Like, right. My perspective of how my parents were handling things and going through things is probably completely different than their perspective of how they were handling things and going through. But it didn't feel safe. Even me now, looking back to me as a child, it didn't feel safe to have big emotions. And that's why they're just kind of bottled up. I don't have them, either positive or negative emotions.
Right, and one of the reasons that you have a hard time remembering if your parents allowed you to have a big emotion without being disciplined is because when the emotional need is met in a connective, belonging way, the issue in your brain is resolved, and therefore you're not going to remember it. You know, it's easier to remember the bad things that happen to us. And so not having our emotions, understood and validated and whatnot is going to cause over time a lot of micro traumas. And you're going to start to remember, I remember that time that my parents did A, B, and C.
Right.
Which didn't allow me to express my emotions. And that was really unfair, and it was short-sighted, and it was, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to say it was socially acceptable. They didn't know any better. We have a tendency in my field to parent bash. And I'm not a big fan of parent bashing or parent blaming, despite what you've heard on the episode. I'm a fan of understanding how that environment formed my current day functioning. But I would say that most parents do the best job that they know how to do with the skills that they were given.
Right.
And our parents' generation, children were not supposed to be heard. I mean, literally, we would go outside and play until the streetlights came on. I mean, my mom was able to keep our house as clean as she did because we were never home. Because we were always outside. Does that make my mom a bad mother? No. Did she neglect her children? Yes. Has that had long-term impacts on all four of us kids, so myself and my three siblings? Absolutely it has. But my mother loved us. Mm-hmm. My mother absolutely loved us, and she was not doing anything different than what was norm for the time. So we've got to really be able to look at these things as a place of understanding it, not blaming. Now, yes, there's abusive things in there too, and even that we can, kind of get softer about, but I don't want to minimize somebody's abusive experiences. There are absolutely things that, parents have done that are not tolerable or
and-
shouldn't be tolerated, so on and so forth.
And you're trying to teach skills that allow us to figure situations out, to empathize. Like you said, I don't want to parent bash. I feel like parent bashing just leads to resentment, whereas parent understanding leads to empathy. It helps us to understand why our parents did what they did, and then be able to sort those out and go, you know what, maybe my mom did not handle that situation very well, but at least now I can see that she was coming from a place of love. She was coming from a place of overwhelmed. She was coming from, she had a bad marriage or whatever the situations are.
Right.
Then we can sort through those and go, okay, well, how do I now move forward and do something better for my children? And the empathy is really, the understanding breeds empathy, and then we're in a better place.
Well, and I want to make sure too that we're giving ourselves empathy, because I know that there have been moments in my parenting where I fucked up bad. Like, there are days, and I guarantee that my kids are going to grow up, move out, and be like, hey, Mom, do you remember when you did this? Yeah, that has really stuck with me, and it's been hard, and I have to recognize I've
scares
done
me to
that.
death.
Yeah, I mean, that's every parent's worst nightmare is, I fucked up my kids. And I mean, I never intentionally did things to harm them, but have I
But they're still screwed up.
harmed them, right? But have I harmed them in moments where I was not functioning at my finest? Like my best for that day was pretty shitty. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the way to healing those moments between us and my kids is for me to be able to hear about those emotional wounds, hold space for those emotions, lean in, understand, validate, and talk about them in a way that helps us connect. And so, yeah, this is about learning how to have grace for us as much as it is to have grace for the generations before us that did the best with what they knew how to do.
I've really struggled with that over the years too, just being, too hard on myself, too mean to myself. So not necessarily, like, sometimes you have to be hard on yourself. You have to just go, you know what, that was terrible. That was not how I wanted to handle that. And then get to the point where you can provide yourself some grace and learn from it and other things. But there's also times where we just kind of beat ourselves up or we shame ourselves, which isn't productive. I've had to teach at least a couple people in my life that it's time to put the bat down. Stop beating yourself with the bat. It's time to put it down and learn how to manage this differently. But that's always been hard on me too. I can be pretty hard on myself.
And that's a common trait to have in the Mormon church, because we've got, this expectation of toxic perfectionism, but you also are going to see it in lots of religious settings. You're going to see it in lots of workplace settings. You're going to see it in certain homes. You're going to see it, in all kinds of settings where the expectation is you're not allowed to make mistakes, and you're sure as hell not allowed to make anybody else around you uncomfortable. And thus, if you're not allowed to make me uncomfortable without the threat of losing our relationship, it makes sense that your brain is going to protect you from your feelings.
Yeah, and then this next step there for me is that then maybe that's not a relationship I want to work on. Like, if I can't be comfortable talking about myself and the things that I'm struggling with the most with someone that matters to me. I'm not talking about Joe Blow on the street, but with someone that matters to me, a spouse or a parent or a best friend, then maybe that's not the relationship that I want to foster and grow. But without that ability, and I think this is part of why I've struggled with having strong relationships and certainly emotionally strong relationships over the years and good friends. Like I can count people that I consider really, truly good friends in my life on one hand. I've had lots of good friends throughout my life, but really those kind that I could
the ones you connected with and feel safe being vulnerable with.
Yes, the kind that I could share, the kind that I could be less than what was expected of whatever image people had given me. As a bishop, who could I have gone to and talked about the fact that I'm still struggling with temptations for pornography? like, not that I had even done anything with that, but who could I talk to about that? And the numbers of people were extremely limited.
Right, especially when you're in that position where you're expected to function at a higher level than humanly possible.
Well, and that's part of the issue with that kind of hierarchical organization, is that there isn't room for people to be vulnerable. And so that's been a big deal for me too, is that I have not been able to, for whatever reason, as you know, some of it is my past. I have not been able to really emotionally connect well with people in general throughout my life. And it almost led to a divorce. It has certainly led to
more than once.
Certainly has. Yeah, it certainly has led to me not having the support that I need. And that is mostly on me. Not that it's my fault necessarily, but it's on me because I didn't recognize it and didn't have the tools or seek the tools to repair it. I just didn't know. And now, even when I do know, it's still just a struggle. It can be really hard. You know, I can count. It's probably equal the days where you can tell me, you know what, I feel like we did a really good job of connecting emotionally today, and the days that you tell me, you know what, I don't feel like we did very good at all today. They're probably equal, which is way better than it's ever been. But it's still a struggle. If you know, that would be a failing grade in high school kind of a thing. And it gets tough. It's hard not to beat myself up for those things.
I'm going to say, in a lot of ways, feelings or men being allowed to express those feelings is even less socially acceptable than it is for women. And so, you know, when I get my male clients, I hear them all the time talking about, you know, oh, well, I'm crying, or I feel this way and I'm so weak and I'm so this, you know, they're labeling it as some horrible thing. And our society is responsible for that. Our men are supposed to be content or angry, and that's it. And women who feel like, it's just to be expected, they're hormonal, it's a nuisance, it's annoying, it's whatever. But women were there was at least some room for them to have an emotional expression, even if it meant that they were belittled for it. But men were not allowed to and still be accepted in those circles.
Yeah, women were belittled for it, men were shamed for it.
Well, I think they were both shamed
well, I think
for it.
belittling is shaming in a way, but a little bit different maybe in the way that it's done. But yeah, you were cut down as women. Like you were watching Sleepless in Seattle the other day.
I'm going to pause you really quickly. I want to point out that if a man demonstrated emotions, he was shamed by being compared to being a woman.
Yes.
And so the shame is there. I do not want to say men were shamed and women are belittled as if we're comparing that pain.
That's true.
But rather, a man lost his gender identity by demonstrating emotions and being compared to his female counterparts. So I want to point, women were kind of at the bottom of the totem pole here. And if you were a man who expressed emotions, you were effeminate, you were a pussy, you were a sissy, you were weak. And so, yeah, men were not allowed to maintain their status as a man and be vulnerable for eons and eons and eons.
And it's prevalent in everything that we do in society.
Yeah. Go ahead with your Sleepless in Seattle thought. I didn't want to cut you off. I wanted to make that abundantly clear when the thought was still fresh.
Sure. Yeah.
So
and I don't want to minimize the fact that both genders are getting shamed essentially for the same thing, just in different ways. Well, it's the scene where they're sitting at the table. I think Tom Hanks is sitting, I think it's his sister and her husband, but I don't remember for sure because I missed that part. And
right, they're really good friends or whatever it is.
Or sister.
In real life, it's Tom Hanks and his wife.
Yeah, but she starts talking about this movie, the Cary Grant movie, and she gets all teary-eyed and starts to cry, and both men are just like, and her husband's like, she's just emotional. That's just the way she is, and it's just a total write-off of the fact that she's having an emotional experience with this movie, which, hey, having an emotional experience with a movie can be a little corny, fine, but it was completely written off. There was no understanding. There was simply...
Well, and then they made,
And then they
good,
have their
clean
own little
fun.
emotional
Right.
experience with a different movie, a man's movie, right?
Right. They made good, clean fun of her. Cute.
So,
I love that movie.
but it's a very prevalent thing, and you know, I could think of so many movies or different things that we've watched where that kind of thing happens. And
So calling us out and shifting back into our individual feelings, and I'm going to therapize you a little bit, Mason. I'm going to preface this next segment with you can't do what you don't know how to do. And so, Mason, when you talk about not being able to feel because, or not feeling because there was an avoidance of pain, understanding that your brain is wired for that, does that change that perspective? How does that affect you when it comes to these struggles that you're sharing with us today?
a very good question, of course. I'm not sure how it affects me. I can see that it leaves a lot of room for grace. Just when you recognize that you're doing something that you didn't like, but that it's also a natural process, I think that there's a lot of room for grace in those statements. Like, look, yeah, okay, I can see what you're talking about, but this is the way that you're biologically built. This is the way that things are meant to happen. I think it allows for a lot of grace. But then usually my brain gets in the way of offering that grace. My brain will typically say, yeah, but you should have figured that out, or you should have done better, or you should be doing better now.
So you start shooting all over
yourself. There's a lot of shooting going on, yeah. Because it's difficult to provide that grace, and because I have, again, a very fix-it
Are you fix-it Felix brain?
Yeah, in that, like, for instance, I'll give a little window into my soul. I have a very, very difficult time crying.
Unless...
in real life emotional experiences.
Right, I was going to say, because you get teary-eyed on, like, when you read Michael Vey to our kids, you
movie,
get choked up, or if it's a movie, yeah. But for real life situations, the tear ducts dry out. Yeah.
It mostly, well, yeah, any real life situation, I just can't do it. And I think that one of the kind of illuminations that I had as I've gone through some of my own therapy is that when I need to cry, I can't get past the "how's this going to help me?" question. I can't seem to just sit with it unless it is overwhelmingly. So there's been a couple times recently, as you've struggled with the church and as new information has come up that you had to write in your book, there's been a couple of times where I've been able to cry at least a little bit, but mostly I can't seem to get past the "how is this supposed to help me?" Or maybe there's some of that I can't fall apart. I have to stay strong, and so I'm not able to just get to that point, because I know academically that crying is a very healthy thing. Like, I don't have any problem with an adult who falls down into tears, man or woman, because I know it can be healthy, but I can't seem to rectify or bring together the ideas that this is healthy and how is this supposed to help me?
Well, then I want you to keep in mind, so when we cry, we actually metabolize cortisol and adrenaline. So when we talk about the health of crying, it releases stress from our body. And so, yes, crying is very healthy. And I love the insight that you have that my brain what I heard you say is my brain is taking crying and identifying it as purposeless.
Yes.
Emotions are purposeless. Therefore, why spend any time with them? And I'm not saying, emotions are, in my opinion, obviously not purposeless, but that's almost like what that, again, subconscious level is going on for you.
Yeah, and just one little bit of clarification. It's not so much that emotions are purposeless, although sometimes I feel that way as well. It's the crying part. It's the falling apart because of emotions that is purposeless. It's not so much that, well, I'm sad. I have a reason to be sad. It's that
the
crying
expression
part
of that emotion.
Right. The crying part or the falling apart part isn't going to help me. So why am I doing this?
Right. So I guess my therapeutic question for you, if you were a client in my room, I would ask you something along the lines of, what is it about shedding tears is so uncomfortable for you?
I think that it is, it's so incredibly vulnerable, and I cannot therefore control someone's response to that vulnerability.
So
even you, like, because the few times that I have cried, I think it's been just with you. You're a safe person for that, but I still just can't get to it. So I don't know.
Actually, I'm going to challenge you on that. The first time in our marriage that you truly cried, you left me out of it. It was when I called you to let you know that our son Brig, who was 4 years old, had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital for trying to kill two of his younger siblings, one through smothering and one through strangulation.
Yeah, I
And
wasn't in a place to
you went
to do it then.
right. Well, and I
you.
remember you telling me you went into your hotel room once you were alone, and you fell down onto your bed, and you said you cried harder than you'd ever cried in your life before. But when you called me to inform me that that's what had happened, when we touched base later, you were back on the, now I'm ready to problem solve and fix it. And the reason I bring that out is not to be like, you left me out, you jerk. That's not at all, where this is going, but rather the idea that you're not alone in expressing your emotions in secret, because feeling vulnerable isn't something that you're able to do at that time. Right.
Yeah.
And that one of the things that, again, if we go back to Brene Brown's research, is that if you are vulnerable with people with whom it's safe to be vulnerable, it's connective. And that's, when I look at what I see in my couples sessions, is that when my couples are able to achieve vulnerability with the follow-up of that understanding validation piece, they heal from all kinds of wounds. I mean, y'all, I've had clients that have survived 28 different affair partners. And what healed that couple was connection and vulnerability, and talking about how the cheating partner felt like they were never good enough, and that they had grown up with this idea that the more individuals they were able to have sex with, the more powerful, the more influential that individual would then be, and identifying that was actually making that individual weaker and harm those that they were closest with.
Right.
They were getting the opposite outcome of what they wanted. So, Mason, would you be willing to, and I know that let me put a little caveat here. We're kind of picking on Mason and his emotional constipation. Insert comedic effect for release of tension. It's that Harry Potter line, just trying to diffuse the tension. We are on a movie kick today.
Movies are life.
Movies are life. So no, the reason I think that we're talking more about your emotions, Mason, today is because we're covering more of that vulnerable side of emotions, and that more tender side. Because for me, I don't think I ever growing up struggled to show emotions. I was on the opposite end of the spectrum where my emotions always came out big and loud. I mean, my excitement is loud, my sadness is loud. I'm a loud personality type,
Amen.
which
Hallelujah.
I think is which I think is one of the reasons why connecting, Mason, with your family where emotions are almost taboo, kind of that made that a little bit rough there. But my issue was being stifled. It was, no, you have to be quiet. Sarah, why aren't you being quiet? And a lot of that was my ADHD. I'm sorry, y'all. I tried really hard to hold the feelings in, but they just wouldn't stay inside.
Just gonna explode.
Right. And so for me, my emotional expression is on the complete other end of the spectrum. And we should probably do a podcast here in the near future that follows up what to do with those of us who are like me, where the emotions are all over the place and in your face and everywhere all at once. We can absolutely do that. But I want to kind of swing this back around because, I'm out of the church now, and because of what I do, I've shed a lot faster and with a lot more ease, a lot of the control that Mormonism had over me, just because of my career path. And most people are not going to get that, nor do I recommend, I want to shed my religious trauma, therefore I should go into the behavioral health field. Not at all. There are plenty of resources out there, but for me, I kind of stumbled into this when I was searching for answers for how to parent Brig. So Mason, what about for you when you talk about those really raw emotions as your family dynamic has shifted due to my exit from Mormonism? What is there for you? I mean, if you're representing the listener, what's there for you? And if you need the feelings chart to help you, it's right there behind you.
I almost pulled it down before we got started.
Well, I mean, if you need to, I can make noise while you do so. So,
one of the first things that come to mind, I think, is fear of disappointment.
Disappointing who?
Fear of either disappointing my family or having them disappointed in me. Maybe those are the same thing, but they sound a little different.
Well, I'm going to slow you down. This is us leaning into that emotion. And yes, listener, I'm cutting him off, but I'm doing this for a therapeutic modeling.
Well, because I'll go too fast.
Of how to lean into the emotion. So I am purposefully slowing Mason down here. This is me modeling how to do this. And you, as the listener, can do this for yourself. So Mason, what I hear you say is, one of the primary emotions that I have experienced as Sarah's left the church is disappointment. And that disappointment, that you will be a disappointment, correct?
Yes.
And then what was the other one? Because it wasn't disappointment in me.
No.
It was different.
I mean, I've felt some of that over the course of the last couple of years, but mostly what we're talking about now is with my family. It's a feeling that they're disappointed in me.
And so that follow-up therapeutic question is, what does your family being disappointed? Say more about that.
There's this, I think that part of it is just that I maybe have based some of my own self-worth on the approval of people that I care about, not just approval in general, but the approval of people that I care about. And so there's this fear that if my family becomes disappointed in me, that I lose some of my value. And I'll actually, an example that's similar.
Don't go into facts.
Well, oh, okay.
Stay in your feelings. Stay in your feelings. Is there a fear that they will love you less because of disappointment in you?
Maybe. I'm not sure that I've felt a fear that they'll love me less, but that there will be far less interaction. Like, I already don't interact very much with my family in general. And so there's a fear that there'll be less interaction, there'll be less communication, involvement, less relationship in general.
So what I hear you saying is that there's a fear of being abandoned.
Yes. Yeah, I think I haven't ever really thought of it that way, but I think that's an appropriate label.
And I'm also getting this sense that you feel that not that you are less valuable, but that you will be less valued by them, so that there's also going to be a loss of voice, that you will lose respect, and that your voice will no longer matter in that system that is so important to you, that you'll be silenced.
Yes, in some ways, absolutely. The example actually that I was going to share is, when I was bishop, my voice was suddenly incredibly impactful, whether or not it deserved to be.
Right. Your status made every word that came out of your mouth of higher value.
Right. And not that I necessarily wanted it that way, but it was that way. And then, of course, when I was released as a bishop, that as if you're released as a bishop but remain active in the church, you retain some of that because you're a former bishop. So people pay more attention. And now with my family, it feels like, I don't know if it would be this way, but it feels like it would be, yeah, well, he's not even a member of the church anymore, so his opinion's just not valuable. It's not. And we could be talking about something completely unrelated to the church, but it feels like there's always, you said, a silenced voice, and I think that that's a big part of it. Yeah. Not that I can't say anything, but that what I say isn't appreciated or valued anymore. And I haven't really dealt with that in my family very much. I've always had kind of a impactful voice, or at least it's felt that way.
Right. I've heard you say in the past that your family's always held you up. You're the pedestal child. You're the look at how awesome Mason is. I've been told that
by at least one sibling.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really difficult because you don't have any power to change those opinions. You're completely powerless in creating a different, like, there's no way for you to stop this. It's,
in a way, I'm seeing with my family the same dynamic that you probably felt with me when you were leaving the church, and we were unable to talk about things, or I obviously didn't value your opinion about the things that you were learning. In a way, I'm feeling the same thing with my family, except that we don't have to live together. We don't have to be in proximity. So where you and I were forced to work through it if we wanted to stay together, which in this case we did, with my family, it just adds more distance because we don't have to work through it. With the exception of one or two siblings, we don't have to work through it. Even my parents, my mom, who I've always had a good relationship with, she hasn't cast me off at all, but she's very reticent to, it feels like she's very reticent even to talk now because who knows what's going to come up.
Yeah, that sounds very lonely.
It is.
Yes, abandonment is very lonely.
It is really interesting to be feeling a lot of the things now that I couldn't recognize, appreciate, or give space for that you were feeling 2 years ago. And I know that others who are listening have felt the same thing, whether you've been in that place Whether you've been in your place or in my place or in my family's place or wherever, I know a lot of people have felt these same things. And yeah, loneliness is, I think you've said that loneliness has been,
It's the worst feeling
it's
in
the
the
worst
world.
feeling in the world. Yeah, that's what you've said. So,
Right,
yeah.
because humans are wired for connection and community and belonging.
Right. The whole statement, it takes a village to raise a child. It just speaks to our need for community. It's not so much that you need to have more than one or two people to raise a child. It's that we need community.
We need to belong
Yeah.
within community. And my exodus out of the church threatened your belonging.
Yeah. Yeah, because to truly belong, I have to be able to be authentic and accepted for my authentic self in that group, whatever group it is. In this case, we're talking about my family. And it's difficult even to have the conversations that would decide whether or not I belong, because they're so scared of the fact
tainted.
that I'm considering leaving the church or have left the church. I don't even know what they think at this point in time for some of them. Obviously, I'm anti-Mormon because we're doing this podcast. And so it's difficult to even to have the difficult conversations, and that's lonely as well.
So it sounds like many of your fears of being abandoned by your family have been realized.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like there's a lot of judgment there too. I'm just actually kind of looking at this, some of the core emotions that I'm feeling are fear, which I've talked about. And then some of the core emotions that I feel like they're feeling, whether or not I'm accurate, of course, because I don't know, but one of those is disgust. And if you track disgust, it goes to judgment. And the problem with judgment is it's so very often ignorant. We're making judgments, but we don't really understand someone.
Right. But as you look at your family, what is leading them to judge you? What emotion is it that is most likely that they are most likely experiencing where judgment is how they protect themselves?
Fear, for sure. I don't know if there's something more deep than that, because I'm one of those emotionally illiterate people.
But hang on a second. Isn't it interesting that you are scared? They are scared. Is it fair to say that fear is actually what's getting in the way of connection?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Without question. It was the same way with you and me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even before all this stuff, the reason that we struggled with emotional connection, there was a lot of fear there, partly because, again, of my fear of being hurt, of, I'll get more vulnerable here for a second. You talked about the struggle that you were having when we were seeing Robin because of Abby. We had adopted Abby. Well, before Abby, and what led to this problem was that we were in the process of adopting twins. They had been born. They were in the NICU. You went and you basically stayed by their side for 6 days with the understanding that you were going to be able to adopt them.
Right.
I came with the kids and met them as well.
We were actually in the process of getting the insurance approval to have the girls transported from Philadelphia to North Carolina so that I could be home, because we knew they were born so premature. We knew that they would be in the NICU for a prolonged period of time. Like, we were in the process.
So we were deep in this process.
Yeah.
Mom was very much in favor of us taking them, and we thought Dad was too in that. And then Dad, being the deadbeat that he was, and I know that's judgmental, but that's the way that I felt about the
Dad
situation.
changed his
Decided he
mind.
wasn't going to do it, and part of that was, part of my judgment, him being a deadbeat, is that he didn't take the girls.
Right. He
They
did.
just
He
ended up
denied
in the
the
foster
adoption.
system.
He denied the adoption and didn't take care of them.
And didn't take them. Yeah.
So they ended up in the foster system.
Right. So there was that, and I think that both of us have probably tracked our emotional struggles really to that point. And maybe there's other things involved too, but that was at least one of the big things, because you were devastated. You had spent 6 days with these girls. You loved these girls already as if they were yours, as if you'd had them for 10 years, not just 6 days.
They were my babies.
They were yours.
They are my babies.
I came and I met them, had the other kids with us, and then I had to go home. And I've always put up walls anyway. There was no way I was falling for these girls until they were in my home. For better or for worse, it saved me a lot of pain at the time, but it also prevented me from recognizing just how hurting you were, how devastated you were, and I was unable to connect with you because I couldn't see it. And
what was it? So with that idea of let's stick with the feelings, what was it like for you to watch me grieve in that way?
I didn't understand. And because I didn't understand, I revert to this idea: how is this going to help me? How is grieving over these girls who weren't technically quote unquote ours yet, how is this going to help me? And I didn't understand that that's not where you were. And I'll regret that forever, because I should have known better, but I just didn't. I didn't have the tools. I didn't know.
You couldn't do what you didn't know how to do. And I think it's so important for our listeners to hear that, you and I grieved the loss of our twins very differently and still do.
Yeah.
Absolutely still do. That when I left the church, I felt liberated and free. And as you're struggling, you're feeling trapped and held back. And so it's really common for us to have similar life experiences, but have a different emotional response, a different emotional expression. And this is why it's so important to recognize that you need to have somebody, you need to find those people. And if you can't find somebody to have a relationship with, seek help, seek a coach, seek a counselor. And if you don't connect with them, fire them and get another one. Like, I want our listeners to be actively engaged in finding somebody that you can be vulnerable in this way with, somebody who's going to hold space for you, because this heals.
Yeah.
But also recognize that just because you and I have a similar lived experience doesn't mean that we experience that in the same way. This is where we get into my truth versus your truth, or, the subjective experiential truths. Ours are different. We both lost twins that day.
Yeah.
We both lost a lot of money that day.
Yeah.
Over the course of the next several years, we battled the system to bring them home, and we were denied because the judge was traumatized.
Yeah.
And was unable to make a decision. I had a hard time for a long time holding space for the trauma that judge had experienced that stopped him from being able to take action and protect our, at that point, surviving twin and older sister. But again, there was an emotional experience connected with that needed to be healed.
Yeah, I one of the most important things that I've learned in this journey, of course, came from Brené Brown, right? 'Cause,
Right. Yes, we're big Brené fans here. If you haven't noticed, you haven't been listening.
She talks about compassion, and one of the most important things that I learned, and this is what she says, is compassion is knowing our darkness well enough that we can sit in the dark with others. It is never a relationship between the wounded and the healed. It is a relationship between equals. And I think that my entire life, it's not that I've been afraid of emotion. It's that you had to come to me. If you needed emotional support, I was willing to offer it. I don't feel like I intentionally rebuffed your need for emotional support. I probably did on occasion, but it wasn't intentional. If you came to me saying, hey, I need emotional support, I need a hug, I need more than that, I was usually willing to offer that, but you had to come to me. And compassion, and if you think of this from the background of Christianity, in the Book of Mormon, when Jesus is about to leave after visiting the Nephites, he says, "My bowels are filled with compassion." It's being able to just be with someone as they hurt, and I'm not very good at that still, but there's a capacity that's growing, and I think but it's hard. It's you essentially you end up hurting with someone. It's almost like you're inviting pain into your life so that you can be with someone in their pain,
right?
And you have to be in a place to do that. And
but you're talking about practicing feeling shit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for someone like me who has grown up basically avoiding the pain, it's a very difficult change.
Well, and let me frame it this way, and please correct me if I'm wrong. And that is, you grew up in an environment, as did I. Like, this is not Mason family bashing. I grew up in the same environment, that if you were emotional, you were less than. Just like as we said before, if a man demonstrated emotions, he was feminine like, therefore he was less than. And so in a way, as we try and stop ourselves from experiencing our own emotion, as we avoid sitting with people in their darkness and empathizing with them, you are elevating yourself above them, almost like, I don't want to step into the raging river because I'll drown, but also I'm better than that. There's this sense of, if I step down, I lose value. I'm less than. And really
or
what
I'm going to get dirty too. Or,
right.
Yeah.
And really what happens is that when we step into somebody's darkness with them, we gain connection, we gain belonging, and we become stronger, truly stronger, because our brain learns that it's safe to be vulnerable when certain pieces are there. Like, I'm not going to go into a family home evening with your family, Mason, and express my deepest emotions. If I do that, I will be dehumanized not because they're assholes. They've acted that way for sure at times, but that's not who they are, but because they are protecting themselves from feeling, because if they feel, they might be less than. And they disconnect from the wounded. And if you hold a spiritual belief, if you're amongst the Christian faith, the Savior did not wait for people to come to him.
Right.
He went to them. He sat in the darkness, and he didn't necessarily demand a whole lot of them either. It was, I'm here to heal with you, be a part of that journey. And if you never follow me again, I don't care. That part doesn't matter. We don't have to agree. You don't have to change your entire life to feel my love for you. Here I am. And so as we come to a close today, number one, Mason, I think that you did a really good job of staying with the emotions today and trusting me as I was like, wait, don't get into the story. Come back to that emotion and really dig in. I hope that our listener is able to recognize that this was an opportunity to model a lot of different ways of having a conversation emotionally. And of course, I did not do this perfect as a wife, as a therapist, but I want you to identify the elements of identifying the emotion and then trying to take that emotion a little bit deeper so that you gain deeper understanding. So with Mason, he talks about we started with, I don't want people to be disappointed in me, and took that all the way down to feelings of abandonment and losing his voice within his family of origin and his community. So becoming less valuable within your community. That's how we went from disappointment to really the nitty gritty, those itty bitty roots on a plant. Like we've got that main root, and then we're exploring all the little offshoots of where those go so that we can heal those emotional wounds or address them or take that data and utilize it differently. What I did as the, therapizing or the wife or the listener role, really at the end of the day, I was the listener role, was that I told you that sounds lonely, that feels scary. I deepened that emotions by listening to you. I stayed in that emotional place. I didn't come out and offer you advice. I validated, Mason, when you said, yeah, Sarah, you say loneliness is the worst thing in the world. I was like, yeah, it is, because we're wired for connection. And then I took that right back into Mason's feeling. Was this realized? How was this realized? So we were really focusing and keeping the focus on Mason, on Mason's experiences, on Mason's emotions, without solving those problems. Like, Mason, do you feel like I offered any solutions for your emotional experiences in that moment?
No, doggone it. Let's get some solutions.
Right. Because
No.
Fix It Felix is the very last stage. Because when I get to the place, Mason, do you feel like I understood you today?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want my advice, or did you just need to talk to me about your feelings today?
Today, I just needed to talk. Yeah, there's one other piece.
Hang on.
Okay.
Because you said I just needed to talk, or in the Gottmans, this would be the worksheet that we worked is stress reducing conversations, which is it's that one-sided conversation. And because you say I just needed to vent, Fix It Felix doesn't come out. He stays away because you have identified, I don't need Sarah to fix it. I just needed to be heard. I just needed to be seen. I just needed to be reassured. And so in your own relationships, this would be an opportunity to say, do you want a hug? Do you need some time alone? How can I be of moral support to you? Honor that. And then the conversation is not necessarily over. It's not like you change the subject, but Fix It Felix stays gone until the speaker, in this case Mason, asks for advice.
Right. What do you think I should do? Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Right.
There's one other thing, the last piece of this, when Brene Brown talks about compassion, she also says the tendency is to flip on the lights and say everything's okay. Mm-hmm. Compassion sits in the dark and just feels with someone. And the reason that I bring that up is because that really hits home for me. That is my tendency. And it's not because I want to devalue what you're feeling. Mm-hmm. It's simply that, how is this helping me? Let's get up. Let's move on. The the typical Mormon, put the shoulder to the wheel, right? Let's
There's
drive on.
right. God is giving you trials to make you stronger.
Right.
God has your back. Those are very minimizing. It's the phenomenon of grief. Like, I cannot even count how many clients that I've had who have lost somebody close to them or an animal close to them. So, mother, father, sibling, spouse, child, whomever.
Dog, cat.
And almost always the most hated phrase is, they're in a better place now. It's supposed to be a comforting thing, but it minimizes and shuts up the expression of that painful, longing, devastated, I miss you. Even if the person that you're losing, if the death was expected and they're 85, 86, 25, 25 million years old, if the person that is getting ready to pass as a dinosaur, they're in a better place. They're not hurting anymore. Those end up shutting down.
Yeah. The feeling
The
process.
impact of the person in grief misses them, that there's a hole in their heart, that there's no way to fill that hole. When I look at what happened with the twins, for me, people would tell me all the time, it must not have been God's will that they were yours, or I guess it just wasn't meant to be, or trust God, there's always another child. And I'm like, I have a hole in my heart.
Yeah.
That is never going to be filled again. Don't take my hole away from me, because if you try and take that hole from me, then the lives that were supposed to be mine, that pain, that love is not honored. And what I really need, and what one of my closest friends, Lara, was able to do, was sit with me and really connect with the fact that I had lost 2 children who I had loved from the minute we were matched with their birth mother. And for me, those children, I loved them as if they came out of my own body. Like, there is no difference for me. If you are a child in my home, it is as if you came out of my body. And the judge says it in the court order, and it's put on the birth certificate. Go ahead, Mace.
For a long time, I wanted to be the person that pulled you out of the dark, because I thought that's what was better. Mm-hmm. And saying something like they're in a better place might be helpful at the right time, but it's not helpful. It's oftentimes more hurtful if it comes too early. But what I want to be now is not the person that pulls you out of the dark, but the one that can walk with you out of the dark when you're ready for that, when the time is right. I want to be able to sit with you and just feel. And then if the time comes, which I would imagine in most situations the time will come where you're ready to walk out of the dark, I want to be able to hold your hand and walk out with you. Having been able to feel with you in your deepest, darkest moments.
Yeah. I want to say that when you have that, I want to pull you out of the dark, usually that's because the person in the quote unquote light is uncomfortable.
Oh yeah, that's totally
with how
what
the
it was.
dark is affecting me.
Totally what it was for me.
And
I don't want to sit in the dark.
And I would say that withhold they're in a better place until the person who experienced the loss says it. Yeah. Because until they say it, until it's what they feel, it's not our place to take that pain away from them. I can speak from personal experience that nobody was allowed to touch that pain. I was protecting that pain. And I needed to protect that pain.
Yeah.
And that pain is still there. That I mean, my one of my twins and the older sister is still alive. And when I see pictures, because I'm still in contact with birth mom,
right?
They're still my girls. And when I see pictures, my heart hurts. There is still darkness. There will always be darkness. I've just learned how to thrive in the darkness. The pain doesn't go away. I learn how to carry it. And that's truly what happens with grief. And that's truly the goal that we want to achieve, is that I am safe for you. I will help you carry this emotion without judgment. And it can be there for as long as it needs to be there until you have learned how to navigate life with these feelings here. Keep in mind, listener, that when we don't address those feelings, they fester, they become toxic, and they will impact your overall wellness. In our physical health, we see this as a lot of times cardiovascular disease, immunocompromised autoimmune disorders. We see that.
There's physiological symptoms.
You get those physiological symptoms. We're going to see this in your spirituality, your ability to connect with others. In all areas of your wellness, this can impact you. So my encouragement is sit with those emotions, lean in. Your brain has not learned how to do that from the time you were little, so it doesn't feel natural. But as you practice it, as you get more comfortable with it, it becomes more natural. And what you will find is that you are more at peace in almost every aspect, if not every aspect of your life, as you get comfortable leaning in and connecting with others in emotions. If this is something that's beyond your capacity, get help. There is help in so many places. And don't be afraid to say, you know what? You're not a good fit for my vulnerability, and search elsewhere. A good provider, a good therapist, a good life coach is going to help you find a connection when they aren't that person.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening. This has been a very somber show.
Yes, it has. There's
We
been
love
not very much
you.
laughter today.
We love you. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Today's episode was hosted by Sarah and Mason Westbrook, produced by Daisy Girl Communications and Alex Vidalis. We would love to see you on our Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma Facebook page. Today's music provided by Run to Life and John Worthy Music.